we are just going to be chatting today, Kristen, and I am so excited to have you on the show on Classroom Matters today because I think that some of the things that you have been through in your life, in your career, both as an educator in the public setting, the private setting, now a homeschool mom and author. I think that one, we have so much in common, but two, everything that you've done is so important to what's happening in our world today and your experiences. And so, thank you so much for being here. And along with that, you're just an overall wonderful, wonderful human being and a good friend. So I'm pleased that you're able to be on the podcast today. Thanks for coming.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here, and I was honored for you to ask for me to visit and be your guest today. So,
Yeah, of course. As soon as, we're going to talk about your book in a little bit, but as soon as these last 6 months, I was like, I have to have her on because she's just a wealth of inspiration and knowledge about your journey and what you're doing and what you've done. And, I think so many of our listeners are in a predicament right now with education and their children. And I know that you are going to be able to have some words of wisdom for all of the listeners, whether they're teachers or parents, and really possibly be able to inspire me as you've done over the last couple of months. So let's kind of dive in and let's give our listeners a little bit about your background and sort of where you are today with what you're doing.
Well, my name is Kristen Schindler, and this is my third year going into homeschooling, but I've been in education since 1996 is when I first started teaching in public education. And I did third grade for 1 year. I got hired the night before school started and didn't know. I'd interviewed in all these different grade levels, didn't know where I was going to land. And I ended up landing in the school district that I lived in, which was wonderful. And I worked there for 20 years. So I did 1 year in elementary, and then I jumped to middle school where they had a need that was needed to be filled in that level. So I spent most of my public school career in the middle school arena, focusing mainly on language arts. I also did social studies, and then near the end of my career, I was in charge of a reading program for students that were struggling readers. But I also did PE and social studies and, jack of all trades. But my heart is really in hearing people's stories. So reading stories, writing stories, relating to people, and just encouraging. Like that was the thing that I love most about when I was a public school teacher is being kind of that cheering section for my students. And when I look back now, it really didn't matter where I was and what classroom I was in. It was just rooting for them and letting them know no matter what it was. If I was teaching social studies, like you could do this. If you're, struggling with reading, like you can do this. And I also was a coach. I coached softball and field hockey in our school district for many years before I was a parent. And then I set that aside when I became a parent because it was just a little too much. So I did public school for a number of years. And then I just got to a point where I just felt this tugging that I needed something a little different. And my oldest son was in middle school at the time. And the way that he was being presented material and the way that he was, the learning style that he was, it really wasn't matching. And so I had an opportunity. My youngest daughter, she attended a local Montessori school, and she was still there. And they started a program, an adolescent program. And it was completely out of the box in terms of anything I'd ever done. And I remember coming home and telling my husband about this opportunity. And the woman actually said to me, like, I think you would be fabulous at this, but I can't pay you what you're getting paid now. And so that was kind of like, but I knew I needed something different. Like my heart was pulling me to do something different. And I felt like education in the way that it had been done and the way that I was doing it, like I needed more. And so I talked to my husband about it, and the adolescent program, I would have had to go on and get training. And so there was a lot of steps to go into. It wasn't just like leaving one school district, I'm going to start in another school district. There were a lot of sacrifices and training. So I decided to do it. And I spent a summer at Hershey Montessori orientation for adolescent studies. And I spent 5 weeks there in depth training with people from all over the world. Um, and it was just so eye opening. It just reminded me of what education is supposed to be.
Right.
And having children really dive deep into areas for deep exploration and not just surfacey, check the boxes, got to get this done, moving on, moving on. And so I was there for 2 years, and I really thought that that's where I was going to stay. I thought, okay, this is where I'm going to finish out my teaching career, and when I'm ready to retire at whatever age that was, this is what I'm going to do. And we partnered with a local farm. We had the kids did horsemanship. We had bees. We did all of these things, took lots of trips, because at this point where I was in the public school, we weren't able to take field trips anymore. Like the middle school, it was just too big, too many kids. And that was really sad. So that was an area that I was excited about, being able to take the kids to museums and different things. So unfortunately, that program only lasted 2 years. We just didn't have enough push from students. We didn't have the numbers. And I was so grieved when that happened, because for 2 years, I just blood, sweat, and tears. I mean, just every day. And my husband and I talked about it, and my middle son was supposed to start that program with us. That next year was going to be his year to start. And we kept telling him, like, you're going to be in the adolescent program. That carrot was like so
Mm-hmm.
juicy. And then it closed. And so my husband said, well, our older son, I have three. I have my oldest son's going to be a senior this year. My middle son's going to be a freshman, and my daughter is going to be in 5th grade. But at this time, my oldest son was just going to start a local high school. And so my husband said, well, why don't we do this? Why don't you were going to have our middle son. Why don't you just homeschool him for the next 2 years? And because we'd always talked about homeschooling, but we just never thought financially we could swing it. And so that was the plan going into it 2 years ago and this is our 3rd year in homeschooling, was that I'll just homeschool the 2 younger ones. The oldest one will go to a local high school. And that was my plan. That was what I thought we were getting into. And then soon after, my middle son said, I don't want to go to a local high school, because he got to meet some co-op friends and see that there were people who were high schooling or homeschooling through high school. And he's like, I just want to homeschool with you the whole way through. What he did was he did the math, and he realized that my daughter was going to get 5 years with me, and he was only going to get 2. And he was like, not having that. He was like, that is not fair. So, and then eventually, honestly, my oldest son, he decided to come home and do his homeschool high school through homeschool, because what he was doing and what he wanted to do for his future in terms of college and things like that, he wanted to make some different choices. So now we're starting year 3, and we're all home. We're all going through this journey. And so it's just interesting to see how everybody comes to homeschooling. Everybody is so different in their journeys and how they, kind of come to this place of homeschooling. And it looks different for every family, depending on the needs of the children.
Sure. And it's funny that you say that, because I think when you started your homeschool journey 3 years ago, and I started mine 5 years ago, it looked much different than what it looks like today. And I think, and I don't, I want to say this with caution, but I think one of the good things that might come out of this pandemic and the situations in education is I really think that it's bridging a gap between teachers, parents, homeschool families, because we're really kind of all in one and the same right now. We're all in a situation where we're having to take responsibility and accountability across the board equally for our children, because we don't know what's going to happen in the education system. You've got parents that are choosing to now keep their children at home, and you've got teachers that are, more teachers now than ever that are moving into staying at home or homeschooling their own children. And so I want to kind of go back in your journey a little bit and ask you, do you feel like there was a little bit more stigma around, okay, you were a public school teacher and now you're homeschooling? around that then than there is now.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I kind of felt, because I have so many friends. I mean, I was in the school district that I taught, I was there for 20 years. I
Right.
mean, I
Right.
did like deep curriculum development.
Yeah.
I mean, I was one of the people who, because I was there for so long. I mean, I had the
Hmm.
student teachers. And so I kind of felt like I had gotten out of a gang,
Hmm. Yes,
like
I do know.
you just feel like you're like, okay, like I'm on the outside now. So that
Right.
felt kind of weird. Um,
Hmm.
but what's interesting, well, one thing I do want to mention is I really want to kind of go back to what you're talking about, this, about what we've all been dealing with this spring.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I think that it's really important to call it what it is. And it's really crisis schooling.
Hmm.
It's crisis schooling for everyone involved, right? I mean, I have friends that I talk to who live in New York State, who live in California, who live all over. And like when e-learning had to get put on the platform,
Sure.
teachers were in crisis mode, that their jobs, like they weren't properly trained, and, wanting to show up for their kids. And then, the crisis on the home front in terms of people having to work from home who never worked from home, like making, offices and walk-in closets so they could at
Hmm.
least shut the door. So I think, a lot of parents who have talked to me about the choice, they're thinking, they're pondering, they're questioning if homeschooling is the right, route for them, even for a year, because they're just the uncertainty of what this is all going to look like. I just remind them that, you know, homeschooling is different from this spring crisis mode of just doing school at home. And I think
Sure.
that's a big difference. But I think a lot of times, an issue that I had coming from public school, I think if I would have gone straight from public school, because I was educated in the public school, I wasn't someone who was raised as a homeschooler. I think that that transition, that training that I had through that Montessori, at least helped me with my mindset of education could look different than the traditional, form of education that I had been educated in and that I had taught for so many years. And so I think that that's kind of difficult. I think that's where a lot of parents, and I've talked to parents just this week. I've probably talked to 5 parents who are, asking for assistance and help and guidance and mentorship. And part of the problem is that they feel like they're not qualified. Like, I'm not qualified. I don't have a degree to do this. And I
Hmm.
keep telling
Hmm.
them, you are qualified. If this has been put on your heart that you really want to do this, then you just need to have mentorship of people who are a couple steps ahead of you, that have kind of gone. It's kind of like having a new baby, right? When you're 9 months pregnant, you definitely want to talk to someone who has a 1-year old. You want to know what that year entails. And but the 1-year old, mom of the 1-year old, is wants to talk to someone who has a 3-year old or a 5-year old, or whatever, just to kind of have to gauge what's coming down the pike. So so I think that's really important for parents, if they're in that situation right now, to have that safe place to be able to ask those questions, but for them to know that you are completely capable and you can do this hard thing, because you've done hard things up until this point, and you're here and you're listening today. And there's so many resources that are out there, and there are so many people that just want to help kind of walk you through that.
Mhm, mhm. Well, and now I think I want to go back to your analogy of leaving the gang, because I feel like that's spot on when you're in the public school realm for any amount of time, and then you leave to do something completely opposite of what you were doing. I do think that you feel like that, but I think that now parents are going to be much more prepared, obviously, than in the spring. And I love the term crisis schooling. We sort of thought of it as isolation schooling because it wasn't homeschooling. And I know that you probably got a lot of the same comments that I did when all of that happened in the spring. A lot of people were like, "Oh, well, it's probably not any different for you because you were already homeschooling." And I was like, "Hey, this is not homeschooling. Trust me. This isn't even close to homeschooling. Like, our worlds are like just as much turned upside down as yours, because we were learning through the community. And as
Right.
we were in our co-op together, and we were meeting with friends and families, and getting out and socializing and learning through the community and all that. And that was taken from us. So we weren't in the same, we weren't as well off as a lot of people assumed, because we were already in the sector of homeschooling. So, but now I think people get that. And I'm hopeful that going into to this fall, that Kristen, I really wish that we could just stop dividing ourselves into groups. Well, my kid's in the public school. Well, my kid's doing remote learning or e-learning through the district. Well, I'm homeschooling, because we're really all just doing the best we can to educate our children. However you're doing that, whether it's they're sitting in a classroom because parents have no other options, whether it's they're at home doing public school curriculum through remote learning or e-learning as they're calling it, whether you're doing a homeschool curriculum, we're all just trying to educate our children and get them ready for the next phase of their life. And I just feel like there's always these divisions, but now I'm really hopeful that we're all going to be a little bit more apt to work together. Teachers are going to want to help parents. Parents are understanding of what teachers are going through. And so I really am hopeful to see that, at least that change going into the fall. And we've had some time to think about it. Parents have had some time to wrap their head around it. So, I don't know. I hope that it gets better. And I want to go back to what you said about the gang. And the first thing I want to ask you is, do you still have a lot of close relationships with your public school teacher friends as they were back then? Or do you feel like a lot of those relationships have sort of dissipated because of the difference in public school and homeschooling?
No, I still am very close to a lot of my
Mm-hmm.
friends that I taught with for so many years. But that was just because relationship was at the heart of
Sure.
those. Some of the people that I worked with that were more acquaintances, we just, we would see each other during the day and we would visit and stuff. But, once I left that arena, they did their own thing and I'm doing my own thing. But I don't think there's no animosity or anything. It was just, it is what it is. But I really still, have a heart for my friends who are navigating right now, like everything. And, I have friends that are going back and returning and they don't really know what it's going to look like. And it's very
Right.
uncertain. And, I'm just very, cognizant of the stress that they're under and try to encourage them and be there for them as a sounding board. Like, even though that's not the arena I'm in right now. And I'm very grateful that I'm not that I'm grateful that I don't have to deal with it, but just like looking at me as a person. And if
Right.
I was a teacher with 3 kids of my own at the ages that they are, I mean, we would be Zooming from morning till night. So, I mean, I really feel for my friends who are teachers who are in a similar situation, as well as parents who are, doing their full-time jobs and having to do everything. So, but I didn't feel that they, like excommunicated me or anything like that.
Sure.
It was just so different going from public school to then something that was, it was less of, in public school, in middle school, especially, you have kids coming in, it's like 40 minutes and then
Mhm.
you have your program and you have your things that you want the kids to get done. There's not a lot of student choice. And so I went from that arena to Montessori, where there's parameters, there's definite things that you're talking about and you're going over, but the kids also have more choice in the direction of whatever the context is. Like, so if you're learning about ancient cultures, like Cahokia mounds was something that we studied. So that everybody was learning about Cahokia mounds, and then each child decided what part of that they wanted to dig deeper in. Like the art that they did, or the what they grew and what they fed, or they ate, and or how they built things. So that part of learning was missing. And so I actually kind of grieved for the inability to have that aspect. And I really had to kind of grieve the fact that I wish I would have had that flexibility for those first 20 years. But then I was glad to have that in that second season of education. And I feel like now I'm in my third season in terms of just, with homeschooling. But it's just a journey, and every year is different. And
Right. And I want to go back to something that aligns with what you just said about every year is different. Every year is a journey. And so I want to make sure that we are conveying the message to folks that are listening, whether they're public school teachers or homeschool parents or whatever situation they're going to be in the fall. You talked earlier about parents not feeling as though, because they didn't have an education background or an education degree, that they weren't equipped, or they weren't, didn't have the skills or the talents to educate their children. And, I want to talk about that for a few minutes, because I want to make sure and encourage parents that may have absolutely no background in education, that they do have the skills and they know their child better than anybody. And, you and I have had these conversations before about how, and I don't know if you went through this when you went from public school to homeschool, but for myself, as being in the classroom for 10 years, and then I was an elementary school principal for 10 years, and similar to you, I was sort of on the fast track to central office and possibly a superintendency. And, I have all these degrees in education. It was like who I was. And then fast forward from leaving that environment in May and coming home in August, I simply was not prepared as I thought I was. And, all my friends and everyone they were so encouraging. Oh, you're going to be fine. You've got all this education background. It's going to be a piece of cake for you. And honestly, what I learned was it wasn't a piece of cake, and it was a struggle. And I didn't really know what I was doing, because I was in a completely foreign environment with these three children that
Right.
I really had no idea about how they learned like I should have known as a mother. And so it took me a while. There were a lot of tears, there were a lot of frustrations, but in all honesty, I learned so much from other mothers and other homeschool families that had absolutely no background in education that I could have ever learned in a classroom. And so I just want to encourage people that are listening that it's okay. It really, truly is okay that you have your child's best interest at heart. You're reaching out for resources. You know how your child learns. But do you feel that same way? Like, did you have those experiences that people thought, oh, this is going to be a piece of cake for you? And in retrospect, some of that wasn't even necessary.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I like to say, I mean, if you just think of parenting, right? Just
Mm-hmm.
like look at the layer of parenting. Parenting is every day, because our kids are like, today my daughter is 10 years old and however many days old. Like, she's never been this age before, right?
Right.
So the other day she and I were laughing, we were joking, we were singing, I was singing like funny rhyme songs and stuff, and she thought that was just like so funny, and we were like giggling and stuff. And the next morning she woke up, she walked out of her room, and I've been up for hours, she's sleeping in like she's a teenager even though she's 10. And I'm like laughing and I'm like rhyming and made this funny thing. And I looked at her and she says, "Mom, don't ever do that again." And I was just like, "What? Yesterday we were rhyming. I thought we were good." So, I mean, that's just
Right.
parenting. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
parenting is like showing up for your first day on the job, and you go and you're like, "Okay, you're going to be on the first floor. This is your cubby to the right. This is, you have everything situated." And then you finish your first day and you're like, "Oh, this was not so bad. I think I'm good." And the
Mm-hmm.
next day you show up and they go, "Oh, you're not on first floor. No, you're on the third floor to the left, like 5 cubbies down. And oh, there's a guy next to you that like,
Mm-hmm.
whatever." And so you're like, "Wait a minute. I thought I had this figured out." And so that parenting analogy is the same with homeschooling, because learning is it's just like growing. It's just like, my daughter thinking one thing is funny one day and not the next.
Right.
With learning, you're going to have one of your kids is going to want to research deeply on
Mm-hmm.
whatever, and then the next day they're going to want to look at something different. So I think that if parents can just understand that it's absolutely frightening and absolutely thrilling at the same time. It is a literal roller coaster. It is like
Right.
strapping in, and your stomach is going to like, you're going to have your stomach like feeling all flippy and floppy, but the highs are going to be really awesome. And the views that you're going to have are going to be just breathtaking. And then those lows, you're going to be like, "Oh my gosh, where's that yellow bus? I want to put my child on there."
Mm-hmm.
And, but we all go through that. And I think the biggest thing that people need to hear is people sharing authenticity,
Mm-hmm.
because if you're not authentic and you pretend like you have it all together, this other homeschool mom over here is going to be like, "Oh, I'm failing horribly." No, we all fail every day. That's just a given. And,
Right. Right.
and one thing I want to make sure that people understand is that you are not locked in So my first year of homeschooling, we started, and I had, things more traditionally just because I was, had box checking, and I didn't realize I was going to homeschool till last minute. So I had more things that I wanted to make sure I was, covering everything. And about 4 months, and my girlfriend had told me about this one math program, and I was like, I don't think I want to do online math, whatever. And 4 months in, we were all hating this math curriculum that I was using.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, what am I doing? And so she said, well, you could try such and such. They have a free trial. And I was like, we're going to try it. Best thing I did. But I had to realize that I'm the one, I get to choose. Like, if it's not working for my kid, then I get to choose. And that's part of the beauty as well. And I think a lot of times, and that's why I think it's important to see what was happening in the spring with crisis schooling. There was a lot of stress that parents
Right.
were like, you have to get this done. Like, all of this work you have to get done. And the kids were stressed and everybody was stressed. And so parents who I've talked to, they were like, oh, the spring was horrible. Like, I can't imagine homeschooling. And I'm like, well, but you were having to jump through all these hoops that were already pre-placed for you, not because the school district or the teachers were horrible people. They were just trying to give support the best way they knew. But if you do your own thing in the fall, then you put the hoops where you want them to be.
Mm-hmm.
There's certain parameters, obviously, with state requirements, but you choose which hoop you're going to have on which day, and which days you're going to skip all the hoops altogether and go to the zoo. That's just,
Or just skip all the hoops because you're exhausted, and that's
yeah.
okay. And it took me a while to figure that out, because just like you, coming from an environment where we did schoolwork from 8 to 3, that was it. I mean, like I told you before, I had a flag up in my homeschool classroom.
Yes.
You probably did too. I had 3 little desks all in a row. I had the teacher's desk I literally had everything mirrored from a public school classroom, and would wonder why. And the whole checkboxing, right? I made my lesson plans. I was aligning them with standards, and this kid was going to do this, and this kid was going to do this, and we're all going to sit together and have time on the carpet and all of these things. And it didn't work like that.
Right.
And so I had to realize, and it took me probably about 6 months to a year to say, if a specific math curriculum wasn't working when we started it, and the kids were frustrated and I was frustrated, guess what? We're done. Let's put our books down. Let's take a deep breath. Let's go get an ice cream together. Let's go get on the swing together. Let's go veg out and watch, a movie together, whatever. Let's stop and reset ourselves. And, and there are days sometimes when I just wake up and I'm homeschooling and I'm like, I'm exhausted. It's a Thursday. It's been a long week. My kids have been crazy. I feel tired. They're tired. We're going to take a day off today. And that's okay. I know that's hard for people to understand, and it's taken me 5 years to get it, but they're going to be all right.
Well, here's the thing that I think is important. First of all, I did a Facebook Live yesterday, and I told my viewers, if you're thinking about homeschooling right now, one of the things that's in your brain is, I need all the things. I need all the things. And, your Amazon cart might be full because you think you need to have the flag, you need to have the little desks, you need to have this. The most important things, and I'm putting those in air quotes, even though you can't see me, they aren't things at all. You need your heart for your child, and you need to have your brain and their brains working together. And when that comes together, the things that they love, the things that are important, things will work out. And I was listening to an audiobook the other day about Thomas Edison, and that he had 3 months of formal education or something crazy like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, so if the man who created electricity,
right,
it's because he had a desire to learn. He was inquisitive. He was interested in things. And he obviously had someone in his life who was like, sounds good. Let's run with it. And we are all benefiting from that flexibility of, and that was so long ago. I mean, it was unheard of, right? in terms of like homeschooling wasn't really a thing then. But I feel like that's what really I want parents to hear, that if you think about it that way and you look at the hearts of your children, you already know what and how they are as a learner. Like if you said that you didn't really know, like you know, but you probably just didn't think of it or look at it through that lens. And then when you start looking at it through that lens and you go, oh, well, maybe it would make sense if I had my kid do X, Y, and Z. Like we're going to go jump on the trampoline for our, you know, our PE time or whatever you want to call it. But really it's because he's a kinesthetic learner and he needs to move his body. And that's when I can say, hey, what's 7 times 3? Hey, what's 8 times 7?
Right.
You know, and they're popping it out left and right. But if you're sitting doing a timed, you know, times table test, they're like crying and you're crying and everybody's crying and the dog's barking. And it's just like, why are we even doing this?
Yeah. Calgon, take me away.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Do people even know what that means anymore?
I don't know. I say it all the time.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So for all of you listeners that are under the age of 35.
Well, if they have a Roku and they stream things, they wouldn't even see commercials. So even a modern day commercial is, you know.
Right. Look up Calgon and watch the commercial and you'll get it.
Yes.
But you know what? You're right. And I do have a child that is on the spectrum. And, you know, it's so funny that our stories are so similar because my children are almost identical to the same age as your children. I have a fifth grader, a 12-year-old who will be in middle school, seventh grade this year, and then a junior. And so I did have to figure those things out with my youngest, especially. We do times tables while he's swinging because he loves to swing and that's all he wants to do. And I'm thinking, how can I use the swing set to my benefit? And he doesn't even care that I'm drilling him on multiplication facts while he's on the swing. We kind of make it into a game. And so sort of putting aside all of the things that we think it should look like and focusing on all the things. And I want to get to this, you're all the things, because it's so important in so many facets of life, not just in schooling or public school or education, but I think in just your life. And so you have written a book called All the Things. And I want to talk about that first. And then I want to dive into your homeschooling, all the things that you've just started working on, because I think that's going to be a really important tool for folks as well. But talk to us a little bit about what motivated you and what was your inspiration to write your newest book, All the Things. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, about a Mother's Day last year, I had a girlfriend and she and I were talking and she asked me if I had ever read anything by this certain author. And I said, I hadn't read her work, but I'd read and written some, read some other work by similar, authors. And I said, do you recommend this person? And she said, yeah, I've read some of her stuff and she seems like you're writing doppelganger, but you're funnier. And I was like, oh, well, thank you, And so I had been blogging for a long time and she had been reading my blogs. And so that's why she said that. And so, I had people tell me all the time, like, you should write a book. You should write a book. And I actually had a manuscript that was a fiction book that was already completed, but it was not what I wanted to put out there. Like I wanted it to be of value. I wanted it to be like something that people could use and really spoke to their hearts. And so, so I actually last summer, I went on a family trip back east. My grandfather had passed away, but that we also had a wedding on the other side of the family. So we kind of stayed for a longer period of time. And at night, I actually got to read this book that my friend had given me. And so I was reading it and I really liked it. But I kind of wanted to have something that would share a story, even though it was about me and parenting. I wanted to throw it back on the reader for them to like self-reflect and just regardless of what the story was I was talking to them about, I wanted them to be able to think about their own life and reflect and see how it could help them reflect and grow and stretch. And so while we were back in New York, we were in the city one day and we had a situation where my son, and I have 3 children, and my girlfriend, who was my best friend when I was in 5th grade, I lived back in New York for a year. She was our tour guide. So it was my husband and my 3 kids and my best friend. And so we went back to the city and I was like, okay, this is great. We have man-to-man defense. everybody has a kid. We're in good shape. And we went on our tour, and she was our tour guide. It was going great. And that situation that happened that day, we were on the subway, and she had shared with me about a situation where they had been separated on the subway, and she had 2 children. And she said, I don't think this is ever going to happen, but if it happens, this is what you need to do. Like, get off at the next stop, get on the next train, get off at the next stop. And if, whatever. And I started freaking out, because I was like, this was not in my daily plans of seeing the city. Like, I didn't even think about that, because we don't ride the train. We're not train people. So fast forward an hour and a half, and everything had passed and whatever. And we had gotten on the train. We'd gotten on the train, and more people were getting on the train. And my husband and my son, my oldest son, were standing together. And as people got on, my oldest son kind of got pushed away from my husband, and he was by the other door. And so we stop at a stop. We still had 3 stops to go. And my husband steps off the train, and my son sees him step off the train, and he thinks it's our exit. So he gets off, and he starts walking back to my husband. My husband steps back on the train, and the doors shut. And the next thing I heard was my husband screaming, get on the next train and get off the next stop. Meanwhile, I'm talking to another mom over there, because, I have the gift of gab, and I turn, and all I see is our train leaving and my son standing there.
Wow.
And I just was at such a loss. Like, what do I do? And I couldn't freak out, because my middle son has some anxiety that he deals with, and I didn't want to make this a bigger deal. And I really just rested in that, what my friend had told us. And, my children were all there listening. And I just had to have faith that my son was going to do what he heard he should do. And it just was that moment was pivotal for me, in terms of telling the story of this one instance, and how, as parents, like, all the things that we think are important as we're parenting aren't things at all, right? They're the stories, they're the, the building of the relationships, they're the, telling our children, like, encouraging them to make good choices. Because the fact of the matter is that almost all of the major important decisions that our children are going to make in their lives, we're not going to be there. Like, they're going to be on a different train. We're going to be in a different state. We're not even going to know. They're going to have to make those decisions. And so it was really, for me, a turning point. And I wanted to put something together for parents, taking these different stories of my parenting journey, and of when I thought that if I just had all the things, right? If I had all the things in the nursery, like, okay, this parenting gig, I'm hitting I'm hitting the ground running. We're going to be in good shape, right? I got all the different size diapers, everything's folded. But then, as the journey unfolds, you realize that none of that matters. Like, none of that matters. And so that was kind of where the story birthed, was on that trip, and that's certain aspect of that situation. And then I just kind of took other things that I had written about, and then I, merged that with new content and new experiences that had come through. And then I also wanted it to be something that people could use in a small group book study. And so I created at the back of the book, some deeper dive discussion questions to just kind of throw it back to the reader and have them reflect on their life. So it's kind of like one of those things for you to reflect about all the things that you think are important, or that maybe you've kind of held up as important, and kind of peel those layers back as to finding out what's the foundation of where you're coming from as a parent, and even just as in the journey of life. Like, you don't have to be a parent to read all the things. It's written from a parenting perspective, but I've had friends who have read it, and they said it's met them exactly where they are in the journey that they're at.
And so, did your son get on the train, and how did that story end?
We haven't heard from him. So I'm hoping he's doing well in the city. Hope he's not in a gang somewhere. But well, I joked because of my 3 children. Like, we know all of our children are different, right? They're all so unique. And so my oldest son, he's pretty chill. And so when this actually happened, the lady who was standing next to me, she's like freaking out. She's like, oh my gosh, is that your kid? Is he freaking out? What kind of kid is he? Blah, 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 blah. And I'm thinking, okay, the kid that would be freaking out is the kid that's standing in front of you. And we got to make sure we don't let him forget. So she turns to my son and she says, what kind of brother is he? Do you think he's freaking out right now? And he goes, well, since he hasn't like hugged me in like 3 years, I think he's probably pretty chill. He's probably not freaking out. So we get off the train. And I jokingly said, if it was my middle son, he probably would have been like in a corner somewhere, right? Balled up. My daughter would have been like, hey, does anybody have a banjo? Because I got to make a living now. Pretty sure I'm going to be hungry in a couple hours. I can sing you a tune, right? So we just did what my friend told us to do. Like we got off at the next stop, we spread out, and I was like, I hope he was paying attention. I hope he was listening to what, he was told to do and not distracted by someone walking with a pink mohawk or something. I was listening. Was he listening? And so the next train rolls up and off steps my son and he walks up to me and I said, you good? And he goes, yeah, I'm good. I'm like, all righty then, we're good.
So not only a pivotal moment in your life, but a pivotal moment probably in his as well. Yeah. If you think about it, because he had to learn to listen. He did listen and he was better off for listening. And so, it just makes me think that what kind of lesson did he have to learn on that day as well?
Right.
Because that could have been really scary.
Yeah. And he didn't have a phone. I'm going to throw that in there because we had not given him back his phone for our trip because we didn't want him to be distracted because he was going to have all this cousin time and family time. So he was legitimately in one of the largest metropolitan cities in the world, separated from his parents without a phone.
Yeah, it's frightening. I mean, it's frightening for me to hear the story and know the story, and I couldn't imagine my child getting off or not being on the same train as me. So all the things, your book. Yeah. I've read it. I love it. It's amazing. So we're going to make sure that all of our listeners know how they can get themselves a copy at the end of this podcast. Let's talk a little bit about your newest adventure, which is homeschooling. All the things that the information that you're putting out now for the newbie homeschooling families.
Yeah. So I have had so many moms, especially with COVID hitting, just reaching out to me, people who are choosing to homeschool, who are interested in homeschooling. And I just wanted to have a space for them that they felt comfortable and where I could kind of share my journey authentically, vulnerably, and just lay it out there and let them hear kind of like what I do, share what I've done, and what other people have done. And so I decided to create Homeschooling All the Things. It's a Facebook group. It's an open public group. And right now I'm doing lives every day and just kind of talking about different aspects of homeschooling. So today was about really just encouraging parents that they can do this, like looking at the you as in the teacher. And just, we just, talked about that for half an hour. And then tomorrow we're going to talk about our children. And so what I'm going to offer is for people who are they just don't even know how to begin. They feel so overwhelmed. And so I'm going to have a Homeschool All the Things boot camp that I'm going to offer. It's going to be a week long, kind of seminar, Zoom platform type of thing. And it's going to cover more in depth, like looking at yourself, like what kind of a person are you as a parent? Like, do you need structure? Are you someone who can go a little bit without as much structure? Are you completely loosey-goosey? Like you just want to like, okay, today we're learning about penguins kind of thing, like whatever. So just kind of help giving them a framework. And so that's kind of the next step is offering that boot camp. And then I'm also going to be offering to walk beside and mentor and offer homeschool coaching for the semester so that people have someone that they can touch base with, that they can, have a weekly call with and kind of go over what's going well, what's areas of concern, how can we kind of tweak things like I wish I would have had, someone, and I kind of did, but not necessarily someone that was checking in on me, but, with the math curriculum. like giving me some more options and saying like, you can change it up. So, cause I feel like it's a big need, and I feel like I want to help people launch successfully with their homeschooling and feel that they have those like girders of support so that they have a real strong foundation to jump off of.
Mm-hmm. So tell our listeners where they can find your book, which you also have All the Things podcast, which is incredible to listen to, and your services for helping people launch into homeschooling, and your homeschooling live boot camps and Facebook stuff. Can we just go to your website? How can we get to all of this?
Yeah. So you can access my website is KristenLeeSchindler.com. And at that website, you can check out my podcast. You can find links to my paperback book, which is found on Amazon. And then there's also links to my audiobook because I launched the audio version because guess what? During COVID, mamas don't have a whole lot of time to sit and read, but we can all listen to podcasts and things. So it's a lot easier with that digital format. So that'll be where those things could be found. And then I will have a link on that same website that has homeschool resources. And that's where they could get more information about the boot camp. But for right now, they can find the homeschooling all the things on Facebook. It's an open public page, and they can follow that and then be following along with the lives. And then there'll be more information there about the upcoming boot camp and coaching services.
Okay. Well, Kristen, I just think that what you're doing now is so pivotal for the times that we're in. And I think that, you've probably given a lot of folks that are listening some encouragement, to think they can move forward with this and the journey that you've been on and your experiences. And so I'm just so grateful that you've taken the time out of all that you're doing to be on the Classroom Matters podcast. And I really, truly appreciate our conversation today.
Well, thank you for having me. Yeah. It's been my honor, and I'm so excited to just help people move forward and pour into them. And I've enjoyed being your guest. So thanks for having me.
All righty. And that is this episode of Classroom Matters with me, your host, Kristy Houle, and we will see you next time.